fantastic interview with Nick ROONEY. He's the filmmaker behind Pillars of Heaven, which is a feature-length documentary that's been nominated at our festival. Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm very happy to be nominated. It's a great honour. And yeah.
No, thank you for joining. Excuse my hoarse throat. Excuse me. So just for the sake, people should be aware that I've already had a chat with you on Skype, but if you could just introduce yourself fully and give us a sort of brief synopsis about your film, that would be helpful.
Well, so my name is Nick ROONEY. I was briefly working as a diplomat for the European Union at the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I was working on the Ukraine crisis before it happened, at its height, and as it sort of petered out a bit. And during that work, I slowly began to realise that what we were actually doing wasn't really helping solve the conflict. We weren't looking necessarily for peace. We were looking for a way to support national interests, which is perhaps one of the functions of diplomacy. But I felt that this was such a war of such magnitude that this restarted the Cold War tensions off again. And the OSCE, its purpose, its function was to rebuild European security and reset relations between these great powers. And I don't think we were doing that. And so I was quite disillusioned. And so I set off and left my job and thought, what could I do to help the conflict? What could I do to think of a way to bring peace to the people in Ukraine and reset relations between the West and Russia? And so I thought, well, perhaps I could make a movie. Maybe a movie is a good way to sort of highlight the issue and look for a source of peace. And so this film, it's my journey. It's a journey of faith and war, where I look for the soul of Ukraine and for a way to bring peace between the warring factions in Ukraine and more generally between Russia and the West. And as I said, I look at it from a historical, a religious, a cultural, geopolitical, diplomatic and humanitarian point of view. So it tries to deal with the great complexity of the crisis. And as I said, it was a personal journey for me as well.
Where did the title come from?
The Pillars of Heaven, well, as you'll see later on in the film, what that actually means is key to both, I think, understanding the conflict, understanding Ukraine, and potentially solving the crisis. So it is important, it's symbolic of what I think where the solution lies, essentially.
And when you, because obviously there were options that you had, I guess, which was, I don't know, write an article or send something to press. I suppose the question I'm sort of driving at is, you eventually came up with, no, I'm going to, or maybe you came up with straight away, I'm going to make a film.
Yeah.
But did you ever think about exploring any other options? Was that always going to be the end goal?
Well, I mean, I wanted to highlight the character of the people, and you can write an article, sure, but you can't really show the characters. They come to life when they're on screen. You know, the personalities, the thinking, the philosophy, and the beauty of the country and the potential it has. You can't really convey those to such an extent if you write a book or you write an article. And I think the film is the most powerful medium, in my view, to convey a message.
Yeah.
And I don't think I could have done that on print or in any other way, I don't think. No.
And can you give us an idea, because I think before when we talked, you had an interest in film anyway.
Yes, I did, yeah.
But is it possible to convey in words the process of how you thought it would be to make the film, as opposed to actually the finished film?
Yeah.
So, how do they balance? Is there a way to describe that?
Well, I mean, when I was working as a diplomat, I'd always loved films, but I had absolutely no idea how to make a film. So it was a big sort of change in terms of the technical side of making a film. Of course, it's a challenge, absolutely, and I had to have professionals and good people around me. You're doing the technical things of the sound recording and actually shooting as well. But I think if you have a story to tell, you have an artistic vision. And I mean, I've always loved classical painting and classical sort of composition, so I thought about very much every shot we were taking and thought about the frames. And also I love classical music as well, and I wanted to bring the character and the culture of Ukraine into there. So I went to the local choirs and beautiful classical church music, because that's where the soul to some extent really lies in the culture and the poetry and the music of Ukraine. And so that was important because I love other forms of art such as opera and classical literature as well.
Nice.
But I think film, that is one of the great things about film. You can bring in the other arts, if it be it poetry or music or just the theatre. You can combine all these things to create a really powerful piece of moving theatre.
Because we should point out, this film is nearly basically 3 hours long.
Yeah, 178, but yeah.
I suppose what I'm getting at is, and it kind of rolls into a documentary filmmaker I was speaking to yesterday. I was interested with him, and this is the same question to you, is the process of planning and research that goes into it, even before you shoot your first frame film. Now I know you probably had an advantage because of your background and what you'd experienced, but even so, is it possible to explain how much research actually went into this even before you went there to shoot a single frame?
Yeah.
And what was that research?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it was both the practical experience of what I learnt, but also I then delved really into the history of the country, which I didn't know so much about, but I got to learn a lot about the religions of the culture of the country, and more generally the geopolitical concerns of it as well. And it's speaking to locals. I spoke to a lot of Ukrainians as well beforehand. I went out there twice just to take a look at the country as well. And so I was really trying to absorb the character and its history. I really wanted to go to the depths of what this country, what it means. Because as I said, one of the missions of the film was looking for the soul of the country. So as I said, I did have the current knowledge of what the situation was, but I wanted to broaden that as well, and that did take quite a lot of research and reading historical books on the subject, looking at sort of the great poets. Taras Shevchenko, we have a poem, one of the characters reads a poem of his, and as I said, looking at the religious aspect as well of the country. So it was not just the geopolitical diplomatic, which I knew a lot more of beforehand, it was also the wider aspects as well I did work on as well.
And how do you keep it, I mean, a real important thing I know in any documentary, particularly with a subject matter like this, you're always conscious you've got to keep it even-handed.
Yes. Yeah.
And how hard is it to not necessarily let personal feelings seep into this? But I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how hard is it to stop? Because you've got to try and be even-handed. I mean, and I guess you're always conscious of that.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a technical way of doing that? I mean, was it very difficult to actually ensure that happened?
Well, I mean, I of course, my feelings.
Because you might want to bash the West, for instance.
No,
or
exactly.
Russia. So
no,
you've got to obviously make.
I mean, I tried to let as much as I could the sides speak for themselves, essentially, and let their voices be heard. And my initial theory was just to step in to provide context, be that diplomatic, historical, religious, or whatever, and let the characters speak for themselves. And that was a way I sort of thought about getting around that, because obviously when you make any film, you are making decisions of what you show and what you don't show.
Yeah.
And that's probably why the length is there, because I tried to get so much in there to try and get a fully rounded, complex picture across of what was happening.
And that kind of neatly leads on to the next question, which I think I already asked you, but how do you cut this down to, because I'm assuming that if you want to do a broadcastable version, let's say it's 50 minutes, so is there a broadcastable version that you're going to, are you working on, how difficult is, because a $64,000 question is you're taking a 3-hour film, which presumably has been cut already, from a load more footage, and how intrinsically difficult is that, bringing that down to a broadcastable length? Well,
if it were to be broadcastable, I would do a 3-part one. So it would be 3 parts of 50 or whatever, 50, a couple more minutes than that. Because I don't think the story can be told in 50 minutes, frankly. It would lose its heart, its soul, and the greater context of the film would be gone. So, as I said, if it were to be broadcast, I would do it 3-parter. Sort of 3 series, either back-to-back, separate days, or one each week, or something like this.
So it's clearly crossed your mind.
Yes, it certainly has. Because I'm aware that 3 hours is a big film, no question about it. Yeah.
Because we should point out, and I really did make this clear, that pretty much you are a one man. You've done pretty much everything on this. So not entirely, but pretty much.
Yeah,
I think, isn't
I mean,
it?
I did a lot, but I also had a great crew. I had a great fixer, a great cameraman, editor, and sound guy, and they were very helpful. Yeah, but I directed, produced, wrote, narrated, and also co-edited as well. So I did do a lot, absolutely. Yeah.
And would you agree that? Because I think some filmmakers I've spoken to, not all, but some, a small proportion I should point out, have not had, for instance, a sound guy, have not had an editor, and you won't be surprised to learn if I ask the question, do you think that was a mistake? Most of them will say, yeah, actually, if we'd have done it. So I think what you've done is the right way round. But looking back, can you see how the mistakes, you've avoided mistakes when you've seen the cut and think, oh Christ, that's a really good sound, it's been photographed just the way I like it. Yeah. So the question I'm asking is, can you explain why it's crucial to have these people? Because I know a lot of it's down to budget, and you're mindful of that. Obviously we'll get onto that in a moment. But the difference, I suppose, can you explain the pitfalls that you managed to avoid? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was told very on before I did any filming that, look, if people can't hear it, you're in real trouble. People just switch off. So I knew it was key to have a sound guy, a good sound guy. The only sound issues I had were when I went into the war zone, that my sound guy, he wasn't allowed to go into the war zone. So I had to have the fixer, had a very small little sound recording device. And that occasionally I had problems with the sound. But when we were outside the war zone, it was easier because I had a great sound guy. And the fixer I used in the war zone, he did a good job as well. But absolutely, sound is key. If people can't hear it, that's it. You're in real trouble. So
I've heard that so many times.
Absolutely, yeah. But other mistakes, as I said, I mean, the problem with documentary is you don't know what's going to happen. And you're finding, I mean, I had a grand vision of what I wanted the story to be, but I don't know precisely what's going to happen. And that's always a problem in documentaries, I found, particularly when it's still going on and when you're out there meeting the people, you don't know how they're going to react. And so that's the key. I mean, I think when you're doing a fiction film, you're far more in control.
Of course, yeah.
And that was one of the challenges I realised, that I didn't know the extent to which it all depended on God, that I didn't know what was going to happen. And I didn't realise the unpredictability of documentaries, so I definitely learned that lesson. I don't know how you get over that if you go for another documentary. Maybe you're a bit more, I would be a bit more forewarned in future, because realising how unpredictable documentaries can be.
Yeah, I mean, the point you made about the war zone, I mean, because we're talking about reality, this is the real thing.
Yes. Yeah.
No heart, surely at some point, first of all, going into war zone, I don't say you need any kind of permission. I don't suppose you ask one, you presumably just go into it.
No, we had to get to permission. I applied to the Minister of Interior, the secret service, if you will, of Ukraine. They had to give me permission. I then had to write to the authorities in Donetsk and Luhansk. They had to give me permission to come in. And they say, when you go into a war zone, you go through various checkpoints. You have to have the documents, and people have to check and know where you are. And as I said, it goes back to the question you asked before about the unpredictability of documentary filmmaking. If they'd closed the border, all of a sudden there was a shelling and they had to close the border, all my time is gone. No, it doesn't matter about, I mean, never mind the risks of my life or the threats of a shelling to me. It was just the broader aspect of the film itself that, you don't know what's going to happen in a war zone. You have no idea.
So you must have, as a human being, you're about to come to the war zone. Jen, you must have been, excuse me, sounds cracking.
It was.
And what earth were your family think? Because you must have I don't know how much detail you were telling them. Yeah. Maybe you weren't telling that much just so they wouldn't panic too much. But what kind of level of interaction was there, and how were we feeling?
Well, I mean, I was certainly nervous. I'd never been in a war zone before.
Of course.
But I felt very strongly and passionately, and I had to go to the heart of the conflict where it was really at its worst. Obviously, the contact was a bit limited because not great reception in various areas like this, and I was very aware I was being monitored by certain people. I mean, I think I even went to a press conference with the president of Donetsk People's Republic, and I asked a question, and then an hour later I was contacted by Russia's main TV channel for an interview. So they knew who I was and where I was. I don't know how they found me, but I was clearly being watched. And obviously a Westerner in this part was very rare, and I got some great access, and so you do have to be aware of all these things, absolutely, when you're filming in sort of conflict areas like this. yeah.
And might sound a bit of an odd question, but there is a reason for this. Do you love the Ukraine? And what I mean by that, the point of reference I'm trying to use here is, let's say for instance, I don't know how you feel about it. I mean, I actually love my country. There's things that really piss me off about it, but the reason I'm asking that is, or perhaps I should frame it this way, you had an attraction to the country, I guess, but did that become deeper as time went on? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it was a fascinating country, and I learnt so much from the people there, from people in the West, and then to people in the capital, and then people in Donetsk. You saw the real character of people in terrible situation, surviving and struggling. And as I said, if you look at the history of Ukraine, it's a history of struggle. It has been the battleground, the borderlands of Europe for centuries. Great empires have always fought over Ukraine, and they always will.
Yeah, we've got to presume it's its location.
Well, exactly, it's geopolitics. It is a key crucial access point for certain empires, from be it the Ottoman, the Russian, the Habsburgs, Nazi Germany or whatever. They've always fought over this key piece of territory, and these people have struggled, and I really admire the fact that they just survived, they get on with it. And you have, it was so powerful, sort of some people in the war zone just, you know, they couldn't get bread every day, and they're living in shelled houses. And it was just so touching that I remember asking one guy, why are you still here? There was shelling going on when I was interviewing the guy, and he was a couple of 100 meters from the devastated Donetsk airport. And I said, why are you still here? He says, well, it's my home. Where can I go? I just can't imagine this happening in the UK, for example.
No,
if you're living in a
not.
shelled war zone and people just don't move because it's their home. So the heroism of some of the people it's phenomenal.
And when was the last time? I'm assuming you've been back since you finished the film.
Yeah, I've been back. Yeah, because I did all the editing out there as well with local people, and so I've been back a few times. Yeah, I haven't been back to the war zone, obviously, and I don't know if I'll be able to screen this film in Ukraine because, as I said, it touches on very sensitive current issues, political issues.
You
I would like to.
the question actually, because I was going to say what's been the reaction in Ukraine, but I kind of guessed before I was even going to ask it. You probably haven't had a chance to show it.
No, because as I said, I suspect they might not be happy with parts of it because it is so polarised at the moment. If you go to the West, you'll get one side of what's happening. If you go to the East, you'll get another side of what's happening. And I tried to combine and tell both sides, and some people don't like that. So I hope one day to show it in Ukraine, but I don't know when that would be. I don't know.
And when you, because I think I'm right in saying basically you're self-financing.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm guessing when you're crunching the numbers, were two things. One is, did you manage to keep it to the X figure, whatever that is?
Yeah.
Did you manage to do that?
Yeah.
And as you were spending the money, and I know I totally get it why you had made this film, but as the money is going, I'm just being a realist here, is it kind of like, this is really, it's happening and the money is going, and obviously I know you're going to finish your project, so how is that all affecting everything you're doing, and how are you sort of trying to remain calm about it, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said, taking on the role of producer is always a challenging, as well as combining it with writing, directing. And I was very, very aware I'm trying to make this the most cost-effective film absolutely I could. Yeah. And that's why I took on so many roles myself.
To save money,
exactly,
course.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, when I thought about the story and writing the structure and the narration, I'm always thinking about how I can save money. Absolutely, cost-effective was key because I want to make the most powerful film I can in the most cost-effective way. And whether it's, you know, it was the travelling around. We did a lot of travelling for the film, and it was travelling, and we didn't go luxury. It was all cost-effective. So we did some really long train journeys, stayed in some pretty rough areas, and I tried to do as little time as I could on the post-production work as well.
Yeah.
And just try and get the maximum impact out of what I had, essentially. Those are the considerations. But it's always a challenge and always a pressure, absolutely.
I mean, how are you going to top it? Not top it. I'm assuming you've got another subject matter, and again, I'm assuming it'll be a documentary. Is there something that you're thinking?
Well, I'm thinking about another documentary, maybe a couple of years down the line, which
not
would
in a
be
war zone, please.
No. Well, it would be again in the Russian world, more philosophical, but also still geopolitical as well. And it'd be more one of these great thinkers in Russia.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And I said I would also look at doing a fiction film. I'm looking to adapt one of Tolstoy's great novels as well. So that's sort of what I'm thinking of next, really. But I wanted to start off with a documentary, A, because of my experience, and B, because I felt very strongly about the subject, and if I can make any difference to both peace in Ukraine and also more generally a peace between the West and Russia, the film would have been a success for me. If I can achieve even the smallest amount of sort of push in that direction, it would have been a success for me.
And have you discovered something about yourself through the process of actually making a film that you didn't realise? Oh, the fact you've got more balls than me to go to war. Do that.
Well, I mean, as I said, I realised, things are going to get tough, but you've got to see it through to the very end.
No regrets?
No regrets. Well, I think you always have regrets in life, but what's done is done. And hopefully everything will be turn out okay. But,
no, I mean, I don't mind saying, I think I mentioned this to the phone, I really admire you. I admire that you gave up what I can imagine was potentially an amazing career because you felt so strong about it. I don't think there would be many people that would do that, you know, because it's human nature, and if you've got this career laid out which you think is going to go somewhere, which it sounded like it was, so to give that up is quite an achievement, really. So I suppose the regret I was trying to get at was in terms of this one project and how it all turned out, and everything that you've had to do to get it made. But it sounds like to me like you've...
Well, it was a sacrifice. Absolutely, it was a sacrifice, and that was part of the both the temptation, but also the risk in doing this. I knew there'd be an awful lot of sacrifices, absolutely. But if as I said, if I can achieve a measure of stepping towards peace in either Ukraine or between the West and Russia, then it would have been worth the sacrifice. If it doesn't, then maybe it wasn't worth the sacrifice. But that, you know, in the pages of time and history, that will tell. I don't know, but I can't tell at the moment. But,
and again, it's something we touched on, which I was quite interesting. I think I'm right in saying that elements of this have been touched on, but not in the way that you wanted them to be exposed. Would that be a fair way to put it?
In what
well, I think part of the story you're trying to tell, there might have been elements that may have been told previously, but I think you were trying to tell it in a more even-handed way. And I'm sort of putting words into your mouth, and I don't mean to.
No, that's true. As I said, I saw quite a few films. Well, not many films have been made currently on the war, but they've been made a lot about the Maidan, and that was the precursor in many ways to the war. And so they haven't really touched on the war, and if they have touched on the war, I don't think they've touched on it in a sort of comprehensive way that I've tried to do. And they've been either from the Ukrainian point of view, the Western point of view, or from the Russian point of view. No one's tried to combine the two together. And as I said, my approach has its problems, that I will probably have issues showing it in either country, because half the film will please one country, the other half will please another country, and it's combining the two together. Maybe that takes years down the line before these countries are happy to accept this. But considering the nature of these sort of frozen, semi-frozen conflicts in that part of the world, who knows how long that will take? Because you've got similar conflicts going on in Georgia, in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and these conflicts are still slowly simmering. Ukraine is actually active. There's still constant ceasefire violations going on, multi-launch rocket systems being launched, and it's still a hot war in many ways. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, the OSC special monitors, one of them was killed. And the civilians being shelled daily, and it's just it's a terrible, terrible crisis, and it's just not being paid attention is not being paid to it by the international media.
And where do you think right now, looking forward, you could predict, say 2 years tomorrow, where do you think, and if things stay as they are now, where do you think this is going to be in 2 years?
The war, you mean?
The whole Ukrainian crisis?
Well, I mean, President of the United States, in his election campaign, he had a very, he wanted to sort of reset relations with Russia and go towards, try to solve this sort of new Cold War situation we have. That seems to be a bit in trouble at the moment, and relations between the West and Russia are just as frosty as they have been for the past couple of years. I can't see any changes on the horizon, unfortunately. And as I said, the problem with this war is that the geopolitical nature of the country, it's always going to be a battleground between empires, whether it be the US, Russia, the EU, looking for influence in this country. At the moment, they have a pro-Western government in Kiev. If they don't, do the job properly, who knows, a pro-Russian government might come in and then, destabilized by the West. And then the cycle will continue, I fear. And in the meantime, people who suffer the most are the Ukrainians. And I think we suffer as well in the West, that this is a real problem between nuclear powers. It's an unnecessary source of tension. So it's a major issue. It's that this sparked off the new Cold War. this crisis did. Yeah.
And just finally, can you tell me one fun thing about yourself that you've not mentioned?
One fun thing about myself.
One interesting thing about you.
One interesting thing in terms of filmmaking, or what?
Not necessarily anything.
Yeah.
I love throwing that in because people say, oh, okay, I'm related to, or I can do this, or...
I love Italian cinema.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, exactly.
Okay, listen, that's great.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Wonderful.
very much. Yeah, Ukraine, 2016. The Christmas Odyssey. I search for the soul of Ukraine. A journey of faith and war. A country riven in pieces by indescribable events, sometimes called an EU-inspired and US-organized revolution, a Russian invasion, a civil war, a war of lies and misinformation, a war where thousands of people have died and which created over 1 million refugees, and a war at the heart of Christendom, which rips the very geopolitical foundations of Europe to shreds. What could I learn which might help to bring a lasting end to the bloodshed?